her world crumbled under a lie. Could a stranger's quiet strength light the path to a truth she never dared to claim? In the autumn of 1887, Redstone Valley was a place where truth bent under the weight of pride, and secrets hid in the creases of calloused hands. The church stood at the heart of the settlement, its steeple leaning slightly, as if bowing to the relentless Wyoming wind. Inside, on a crisp October morning, Meera Kane stood at the altar, her heart a tangle of hope and dread. At 24, she was no stranger to scrutiny. Her dark hair, woven into a braid beneath a borrowed veil, framed a face too sharp to be called delicate, with eyes that held a quiet defiance. Her dress, ivory lace stitched by her late mother's hands, clung to her frame, a fragile shield against the eyes of the congregation. Meera had come to Redstone as a child, trailing her drifter father through dust-choked trails. The townsfolk never let her forget it. No roots, no name, they'd mutter, their voices sharp as the thorns that snagged her skirts. But Hank Brennan, the brash son of a wealthy rancher, had seen her. At least she thought he had. His promises of a home, a future, had felt like salvation. Now, as the preacher cleared his throat and opened his Bible, Meera dared to believe she could belong. The words had barely left the preacher's lips when Hank stepped back, his boots scuffing the wooden floor. His face, handsome but hardened, twisted with a sneer. "I can't marry her," he declared, loud enough for the rafters to carry it. "She ain't pure." The chapel gasped, a collective intake of breath that sucked the air from Meera's lungs. Her cheeks burned, her hands trembling beneath the lace. "That's a lie," she whispered, her voice cracking. But the crowd was a wall of silence. Her father, slumped in the front pew, stared at the floor. Her sister, clutching a hymn book, looked away. Hank's mother hissed, "We told him a drifter's daughter has no place in white." Meera's world tilted. The lace felt like chains, the veil a shroud. She turned, her braid swinging, and ran. The church doors slammed open and the storm outside greeted her, a sudden, furious downpour that turned the dirt to mud. She stumbled, down the slope, her satin shoes sinking, her veil tearing on branches. Faces blurred past, guests who wouldn't meet her gaze, their whispers drowned by thunder. The rain stung her skin, but it couldn't wash away the shame. "Not pure," she muttered, the words a blade in her chest. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't stop. The path twisted into a forest, its pines looming, like sentinels. Meera's breath burned, her dress shredded by brambles. She fell, knees scraping rock, palms bleeding, but she pushed forward, driven by a fury she couldn't name. The storm roared, lightning cracking the sky, as if the heavens themselves judged her. At last she reached a rocky outcrop overlooking the valley, where the wind howled and the rain blinded. Her legs gave out and she collapsed against a boulder, soaked and shivering, her sobs swallowed by the gale. "I'd rather die than go back," she whispered, her voice lost to the tempest. The cold seeped into her bones, and she closed her eyes, surrendering to the storm's embrace. Then, through the rain's relentless drum came a sound. Hoofbeats, steady and deliberate, cutting through the chaos. Who could find her in a storm that even the stars had abandoned? The storm raged on, its howl a relentless hymn over Redstone Valley, as if the Wyoming sky itself mourned Meera Kane's broken vows. She lay slumped against the boulder, her ivory dress a tattered ghost, rain plastering her dark braid to her shivering frame. The hoofbeats grew louder, cutting through the gale like a promise she didn't trust. Meera's eyes fluttered open, expecting judgment, a lawman, a townsman, or worse, Hank's sneer. Instead, a figure emerged from the pines, his silhouette tall and unyielding against the lightning's flash. He was no rancher, no preacher. Tahu, a Lakota wanderer, dismounted from a painted horse, his leather coat slick with rain, dark braids adorned with a single hawk feather that danced in the wind. His face, weathered yet kind, held eyes like polished obsidian, sharp but not cruel. Without a word, he knelt beside her, his presence a quiet anchor in the chaos. From his saddle he drew a wool blanket, its edges frayed but warm, and offered it. Meera flinched, her voice raw. "Why help a stranger?" Tahu's reply was low, steady as the earth beneath the storm. "The wind doesn't choose who it carries, neither do I." His words landed softly like embers in the cold. Meera hesitated, then took the blanket, wrapping it around her trembling shoulders. He didn't ask her name, didn't demand her story. Instead, he guided her to his horse, his hand firm but gentle, and led her through the rain-soaked forest to a place the storm couldn't touch. She awoke to the scent of cedar and smoke, her body heavy but warm. The lodge was small, its walls of timber and hide glowing faintly under the flicker of a fire. Meera sat up, her torn dress replaced by a soft buckskin tunic, her scraped hands wrapped in clean cloth. A pot simmered in the corner, its steam curling, like a whispered secret. Tahu sat across the room tending the fire, his braids falling over a simple linen shirt. He didn't look up as she stirred, but his voice broke the silence. "You're safe here." Meera's throat tightened. "Where is here?" she asked, her voice a fragile thread. "A place the valley forgets," Tahu said, adding a log to the flames. "My home for now." She pulled the blanket closer, her mind still tangled with Hank's words. Not pure. And the town's silent betrayal. "Why bring me here?" she pressed, wary but desperate for an answer that wasn't pity. Tahu met her gaze, his eyes steady. "You ran into the storm when most would have knelt. That's not weakness, that's fire." He paused, his knife glinting as he carved a piece of wood, shaping something she couldn't yet see. "The rain doesn't judge. Neither do I." Meera stared into the fire, its warmth seeping into her bones, softening the edges of her shame. For the first time since the chapel, she felt seen, not as a drifter's daughter, not as a scorned bride, but as something else, something unnamed. Tahu's words lingered, a quiet challenge. To stay, to rest, to choose. But the weight of Redstone's whispers still clung to her, heavy as the rain-soaked lace she'd left behind. Could she trust this stranger's kindness? Or would it unravel like every promise she'd ever known? The morning sun crept over Redstone Valley, its light filtering through the pines to touch the timber lodge where Meera Kane had found refuge. The storm had passed, leaving a world washed clean, the air sharp with the scent of wet earth and cedar. Meera stood at the lodge's threshold, the buckskin tunic soft against her skin, her dark braid still damp from the rain. Her hands, bandaged but steady, traced the frayed blanket Tahu had given her, its warmth a reminder of the night she'd nearly lost herself. Inside, the fire crackled low, its embers casting a soft glow across the hide-covered walls. Tahu moved. Outside, his leather coat slung over one shoulder, his dark braids catching the dawn's faint gold. He was splitting wood, each swing of his axe precise, the rhythm as steady as a heartbeat. Meera watched, her sharp eyes tracing the hawk feather woven into his hair, a silent emblem of a life she didn't yet understand. "How do you live like this?" she asked, stepping into the clearing, her voice softer than she meant. "So far from everyone?" Tahu paused, resting the axe against a stump. "The world took my kin, my land," he said, his obsidian eyes meeting hers. "But these hills don't forget. They hold what's mine." His words carried a weight Meera recognized, not anger, but a quiet defiance, like a river carving stone. She nodded, her fingers tightening around the blanket. "In Redstone they knew my name but never me," she said. "Just the drifter's daughter, never enough." "Then they're blind," Tahu replied, his voice low but firm. "You carried yourself through a storm. That's more than their whispers ever will be." They worked together that day, clearing a path choked with fallen branches. Meera's hands blistered, her muscles ached, but the labor felt honest, grounding. She caught herself smiling when a branch snapped under her grip, the sound sharp and satisfying. Tahu glanced over, his lips curving in a rare, fleeting smile that warmed her more than the sun. By dusk, they sat by a fire pit outside the lodge, the flames dancing against the deepening sky. Meera stirred a pot of stew, its steam mingling with the pine-scented air. "I thought the storm would break me," she admitted, her voice barely above the crackle of wood. "Maybe it did." Tahu leaned back, his hands resting on his knees, the firelight glinting off the feather in his braid. "Storms don't break. What's meant to bend," he said. "They strip away what doesn't belong, like the lies they pinned on you." His words sank into her, loosening a knot she hadn't named. She thought of Hank's sneer, her father's silence, the chapel's suffocating weight. "They called me unworthy," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "But it was Hank who lied, who wanted me to hide his shame." "You don't owe them that truth," Tahu said, his gaze steady. "You owe yourself what comes next." Meera looked into the fire, its embers pulsing like a heartbeat, mirroring something stirring within her. Tahu's presence, quiet yet unyielding, felt like a bridge to a place she hadn't dared imagine, a place where she wasn't defined by Redstone's scorn. But the valley stretched beyond the lodge, its shadows holding the town that had cast her out. Could she stay here in this fragile sanctuary, or would the past demand she face it again? What would it cost to choose a path where no one else had walked beside her? The dawn broke over Redstone Valley with a hesitant glow, as if the sun itself paused to witness Meera Kane's resolve. She stood outside Tahu's lodge, the buckskin tunic clinging to her frame, her dark braid a stark line against the morning mist. The air was crisp, laced with the scent of pine and the faint tang of smoke from last night's fire. Tahu approached, his leather coat slung over his shoulder, the hawk feather in his braids catching the light like a quiet vow. "You don't have to go back," he said, his obsidian eyes searching hers. "The valley holds no claim on you." Meera's hands tightened into fists, her sharp features set with a fire that hadn't been there days before. "They think they broke me," she said, her voice low but steady. "I need them to see they didn't." Tahu nodded, a flicker of pride in his gaze, and saddled 2 horses, their breaths clouding in the chill. They rode toward Redstone, the trail winding through sagebrush and rock, the town's steeple looming like a judgment she was ready to defy. The settlement stirred as they entered, its dirt streets churned by wagon ruts and the weight of gossip. Meera dismounted, her boots scuffing the earth, her posture unyielding despite the stairs. Townsfolk paused, shopkeepers, ranch hands, women clutching shawls, their whispers sharp as thorns. "That's her, the runaway bride. With him." Tahu remained at her side, his presence a silent shield, his linen shirt taut across his shoulders, the feather a defiant mark of his own outcast truth. The preacher emerged from the church, his black coat flapping, like a crow's wings. "Meera Kane," he called, his voice thick with reproach. "You've no place here after your disgrace." Meera stepped forward, her eyes blazing. "The disgrace was Hank's lie," she said, her words cutting through the morning air. "You all stood silent while he slandered me. That's not judgment, that's cowardice." Hank pushed through the crowd, his rancher's swagger faltering, under her gaze. "You dare show your face?" he sneered, his face flushed. "Parading with a savage proves I was right." Meera's laugh was sharp, bitter. "You wanted my silence, Hank, to hide your own shame. I was never impure, just inconvenient." Gasps rippled through the crowd, faces paling as her truth landed like a stone. Tahu's voice broke the silence, low and resonant, and, "She walked through a storm you'd never survive," he said, his eyes sweeping the crowd. "Her strength shames you all." The preacher sputtered, but Meera raised her hand, her voice ringing clear. "I didn't come to beg forgiveness. I came so every woman here knows what it means to stand when you're told to kneel." She turned to her horse, mounting with a grace that silenced the whispers. The crowd parted as she and Tahu rode out, the steeple shrinking behind them. Meera's heart pounded, not with fear but with a fierce, unshackled joy. She'd faced the town that tried to bury her and left it speechless. But as the valley stretched before them, a new question burned in her chest, brighter than the morning. Could she build a life in this wild place, or would Redstone's shadows chase her still? The Wyoming sun hung low over Redstone Valley, painting the sagebrush gold as Meera Kane and Tahu rode back to the lodge, the town's whispers fading like dust in their wake. Meera's dark braid swayed with the horse's rhythm, her buckskin tunic dusted with trail dirt, her sharp features softened by a quiet triumph. She had faced Redstone's scorn and left it trembling, but the weight of her past still lingered, a shadow she couldn't outride. Tahu beside her was a steady presence, his leather coat open, the hawk feather in his braids glinting like a beacon. His obsidian eyes held hers briefly, a silent question. What now? Back at the lodge, the air was thick with the scent of cedar and earth. Meera knelt by the fire pit, stirring a pot of sage tea, its steam curling like a prayer. Tahu sat across from her, carving a small piece of cedar into a spiral, his knife moving with the same precision she'd seen in his axe swings. You stood taller than their steeple today, he said, his voice low, warm as the flames. Not many could. Meera's hand stilled, the tea's warmth seeping into her palms. I thought facing them would free me, she admitted, her voice a fragile thread. But I still hear Hank's lie, my father's silence. She looked up, her eyes fierce yet vulnerable. How do you carry loss without letting it define you? Tahu set the carving aside, his gaze steady. Loss is a river, he said. It cuts deep, but it also shapes the land. You don't fight it. You learn its currents. He paused, his fingers brushing the feather in his braid. My people lost everything to soldiers' greed. I carry their names, not their chains. His words sank into her, a balm for wounds she hadn't named. They spent the evening by the river, its ripples catching the last light of day. Meera shared stories of her mother's songs, her drifter father's restless heart. Tahu spoke of Lakota star tales, his voice weaving a sky she could almost touch. When he handed her the cedar spiral, a pendant etched with a flame, she clutched it, her throat tight. What's this for? She asked. For the fire you kept burning, Tahu said simply. It's yours, Meera, whether you stay or go. Before she could answer, hoofbeats echoed from the ridge. 3 riders appeared, their silhouettes stark against the dusk. The preacher led them, his black coat flapping, flanked by 2 ranch hands. Meera Kane, he called, his voice sharp. Your father's dying. He begs to see you to make amends. Meera's breath caught, her fingers tightening around the pendant. She stepped forward, Tahu at her side, his presence a quiet strength. Had his chance, she said, her voice clear, unwavering. When Hank lied, when you all turned away, he chose silence. I owe him nothing. The preacher's face hardened. You'd forsake blood for this outsider? Meera's laugh was soft, defiant. I forsake those who forsake me. My home is where I choose it to be. The riders left, their hoofbeats fading into the night. Meera turned to Tahu, her eyes glistening but resolute. I'm done running, she said, her voice a vow. I want to stay, not just here, but with you. Tahu's hand found hers, his touch warm, grounding. Then we build something true, he said, his voice a promise. As the stars emerged, Meera felt the last tether to Redstone snap, her heart unbound for the first time. But what would it mean to build a life in a valley that held both freedom and ghosts? A year had passed since the storm that nearly claimed Meera Kane, and Redstone Valley bloomed under the Wyoming spring of 1888, its sagebrush fields alive with the hum of renewal. The lodge where Meera had found refuge was no longer a solitary haven but the heart of a small community, its timber walls joined by new huts and gardens tended by hands that knew loss. Meera stood in a clearing, her dark braid woven with a single hawk feather, a gift from Tahu that matched the one in his own braids. Her buckskin tunic was worn but proud, her sharp features softened by a quiet strength, her eyes reflecting the firelight that danced in the dusk. Tahu moved beside her, his leather coat replaced by a linen shirt, his obsidian eyes warm with a pride that needed no words. Together they had welcomed others, Outcasts, wanderers, women with scars deeper than skin, who sought a place to rise again. Tonight the clearing glowed with a bonfire, its flames casting shadows on faces gathered. In a circle, a widow with calloused hands, a boy whose limp didn't dim his grin, an elder whose songs carried the valley's forgotten tales. Meera held a cedar pendant, its spiral flame etched deep, and stepped into the firelight, her voice steady as the earth. "I was called unworthy once," she said, her words carrying over the crackle of wood. "A drifter's daughter, a shamed bride. But those names were chains, forged by fear, not truth." She raised the pendant, its surface glinting. "I chose my own name. Wakia, the thunder that lives after the storm. And here with you I've built a home not of walls but of hearts that refuse to break." The elder began to clap, a slow rhythm that spread through the circle, joined by murmurs of agreement, soft but fierce. Tahu stepped forward, his hand brushing Meera's, his voice low but resonant. "You've carved a path where others can walk," he said. "Wakia, you are the fire that doesn't fade." The crowd's voices rose, not loud but full, a chorus of those who'd found refuge in her courage. Later, as the fire burned low, Meera and Tahu sat by the river, its waters mirroring a sky strewn with stars. She wore a new gift from him, a beaded cord, its single blue stone resting against her heart, a Lakota sign of equality, not possession. "Do you ever think of leaving?" she asked, her voice soft, her fingers tracing the stone. "Only if you lead," Tahu replied, his gaze steady. "But this valley feels like where we began." Meera nodded, her heart full. "It's more than a home," she said. "It's a promise, to those who come after, that they can rise too." She leaned into him, her head resting against his chest, the river's song blending with the fire's distant crackle. In that moment, Meera was no longer the bride who fled a lie. She was Wakia, a woman forged in starlight, her name a beacon for the broken. The storms of Redstone Valley would come again, but Meera and Tahu stood ready, their hands entwined, their hearts afire no wind could extinguish. Meera's story reflects the resilience of women in the late 19th century American West, where frontier towns like Redstone Valley were shaped by clashing cultures, ranchers, drifters, and native peoples like the Lakota. Wyoming's history, marked by its early women's suffrage in 1869, underscores the era's complex gender dynamics, where women like Meera often defied societal constraints to claim agency. Her journey echoes romantic themes in literature, like Jane Eyre, where love and self-discovery intertwine, offering hope amid hardship. If Meera's triumph stirred your heart, hit that like button and share this story with someone who needs its fire. Subscribe and ring the bell for more tales of love and courage that light the darkest paths. Comment below. What name would you choose to rise again? Join our community of storytellers today.